Panic erupted across Krell Prime. The mighty warlords, once feared across the galaxy, now stood powerless as their world was vanishing around them. Buildings, roads, entire districts, simply fading into nothing. The planetary shields, designed to withstand the most devastating of sieges, were useless. The orbital defense stations had ceased to exist. The Grand Krell Armada, gone. High Warlord Kratak stood at the center of the war chamber, his claws digging into the cold metal floor. The holoscreens around him no longer displayed fleet formations or planetary defenses. There were no battle reports, no enemy forces detected, nothing. Only the human face on the screen. She had no expression, no emotion, just empty dead eyes staring at him, as if he was already a ghost. Enough. Kratak roared, his voice shaking the room. He turned to his officers. Activate the underground bunkers. Secure the planetary core. We will not falter. The lights flickered. The floor trembled beneath them, and then the air changed. The warlords, the generals, the battle-hardened warriors, all of them felt it. A suffocating, unseen force pressing against their bodies. Their vision blurred. Their breathing became labored. Some fell to their knees, gasping for air. Kratak refused to kneel. Cowards, he snarled, forcing himself forward. You are Krell. We do not. Then he saw them. Humans. Inside the war chamber. No doors had opened. No alarms had triggered. They had simply appeared, and they were watching. Their eyes, dark, cold, and hungry, scanned the room with an eerie calmness. They were not armed. They did not raise their hands in attack. They just stood there. One of Kratak's guards, a seasoned warrior, bared his fangs and lunged. His plasma blade aimed at the nearest human's throat. The blade passed through the human's body like it wasn't even there. The warrior stumbled, his balance thrown off. He turned, confused, and then vanished. No sound, no scream. Just gone. The cold terror spread through Kratak's chest. His warriors, the strongest of his kind, froze in place. The human woman on the holoscreen tilted her head slightly. Then she spoke. You should have listened. The entire city shook. Kratak turned towards the window of the war chamber, expecting to see explosions, bombardments, anything to make sense of what was happening. But there was no fire, no destruction. There was only nothing. The outer city was gone. Entire districts vanished. Millions of Krell lives erased in an instant. His mind struggled to comprehend it. There had been no battle, no invasion, no resistance. They were being unmade. A voice, everywhere and nowhere, whispered through the war chamber. The war is already over. And then, the capital of Krell Prime ceased to exist. The Galactic Council chamber was filled with the murmurs of diplomats and military officials, their voices blending into a dull hum of arrogance and self-importance. The vast hall, adorned with banners of 1,000 star systems, had never seen fear until today. The doors burst open, and a lone figure stumbled inside. His robes, once symbols of his noble standing in the Zorvith Dominion, were torn and stained. His breathing was ragged. His scales darkened with soot and dried blood. The guards moved to restrain him, but he fell to his knees before the council, his chest heaving. His black eyes darted around, filled with something none of them recognized at first: terror. A fear so deep it made even the hardened warriors in the chamber shift uncomfortably. He raised a trembling clawed hand, his voice hoarse, as he gasped out his warning. You must listen. We made a mistake. We thought them weak. We were wrong. The council members exchanged glances. Some scoffed. Others smirked in amusement. The High Speaker, a towering figure with golden-plated skin, leaned forward, his voice laced with impatience. Who are you? And what nonsense are you babbling about? The survivor flinched at the speaker's voice, his body shaking as if the words themselves carried some hidden doom. He tried to steady himself, tried to form the words that had been burning in his mind since that fateful day. "My name is Cordell. I was part of the expedition sent to subjugate Earth, a primitive world, or so we believed." His voice cracked, and he swallowed hard. We thought it would be an easy victory. Their technology was outdated. Their fleets were small. Their colonies were scattered. It should have been over in days." He paused, his mind flashing back to the first encounter. The Zorveth fleet had arrived in the Sol system with the confidence of conquerors. The humans had sent warnings, diplomatic messages, pleas for peace. The Dominion had ignored them, amused by the desperation of a species that did not understand its place in the galaxy. The first battle had been a joke. The Dominion's warships descended upon an orbital station, annihilating it with ease. Human defenses had crumbled in minutes. Their outdated ships had scrambled to fight back, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Cordell remembered watching from the bridge, laughing with his fellow officers. The humans were like children throwing rocks at a storm. But then, something changed. "They let us win," Cordell whispered, his voice barely audible. "We didn't understand it at first. They let us take the station, let us destroy their first fleet. And then, they washed us." The murmurs in the chamber grew louder. Some of the counselors frowned. Others shook their heads in disbelief. The idea that humans, those fragile creatures, had orchestrated their own defeat seemed absurd. Cordell clenched his fists. He could still hear the alarms blaring when the real battle had begun. The Dominion fleet had moved deeper into human space, expecting easy conquests. They had been so certain of victory, so arrogant in their belief that humanity was nothing more than another species to be crushed beneath their might. Then the human fleets arrived. Not scattered, not weak, but precise, disciplined, and faster than anyone had expected. Their ships were smaller, but they moved like predators in the dark. They didn't fight wars like the Dominion. They hunted. One by one, Zorveth warships began to vanish from sensors. Not destroyed in open battle, not taken down in grand duels of firepower, but simply gone. Vanished into the void. Entire battalions sent distress signals, only for their transmissions to cut off with chilling silence. It was as if something unseen was stalking them from the darkness. "We thought it was a malfunction," Cordell continued, his breath coming in sharp gasps. "We thought our scanners were broken, that maybe space itself was playing tricks on us. But then we received the first message. A simple transmission had echoed through the Zorveth fleet. Just 3 words. 'We are watching.' That was when the real horror began. The humans didn't attack head-on. They didn't meet the Dominion in glorious battle. They shattered them from the inside. The Admiral's flagship was the first to fall, hacked from within, its crew venting into space as the ship turned its weapons on its own allies. Then the supply chains vanished. Food, fuel, and reinforcements stopped arriving. Every distress call was ignored. The humans had turned their own tactics against them. Then the whispers began. The Crimson Fang and the remaining Krell warships hurtled through space at maximum speed, pushing their engines beyond safe limits. They did not care for the risks. They only cared about getting away. Commander Gorvak stood on the bridge, watching the cold abyss beyond the viewport. He could feel it. The unseen force that had annihilated their fleet was still there, lurking just out of reach. No alarms had sounded. No scanners had detected pursuit. But he knew. They were being followed. "Status on reinforcements," he growled. A bridge officer answered, voice tight with strain. "The second fleet is en route, Commander. They'll arrive at Krell Prime within the next cycle." Krell Prime, the heart of their empire. A fortress world, surrounded by defense stations, planetary shields, and an armada powerful enough to crush any known enemy. No species had ever dared bring war to Krell Prime. But Gorvak was no longer certain that mattered. On the surface of Krell Prime, High Warlord Kratak stood in the Grand War Chamber, surrounded by his advisors. He was the supreme leader of the Imperium, a warrior who had led conquests across 1,000 systems. He had heard the rumors, the whispers of an unseen enemy. He did not believe them. Enough of this cowardice, Kratak snarled. The Zorvath fell because they were weak. Now you tell me the Krell are weak as well. One of his generals, an older warrior named Korgesh, clenched his fists. We do not know what we are facing, warlord. The survivors are not fools. They claimed there was nothing to fight. Kratak laughed, a low, guttural sound. There is always something to fight. Prepare the fleet. When the humans arrive, we will crush them. The war chamber rumbled with agreement. Orders were sent. Weapons were primed. The Krell Imperium prepared for war. But they did not understand. War had already begun. Gorvak's fleet dropped out of hyperspace, approaching Krell Prime. Relief surged through him as he saw the defense fleet waiting. Hundreds of warships lined up in formation. The Krell were ready. But then, something changed. Commander, a panicked officer called out, "We are detecting movement." Gorvak felt his blood run cold. What kind of movement? The officer swallowed. I don't know. It's not on sensors, but it's there. The lights flickered. The Crimson Fang trembled. Then one of the outer defense stations went dark. No explosions, no impact. One moment it was there, then it was not. A second later, a warship vanished. Then another. Then 10 more. The fleet erupted into chaos. Krell warships fired in all directions, launching missiles and energy blasts into the void. But there was nothing to hit. The enemy was everywhere and nowhere. On the surface, Kratak watched the defense fleet crumble in real time. His war room filled with the voices of dying officers, their screams cut short as their ships disappeared. For the first time in his life, the High Warlord of the Krell Imperium felt something he had never known before. Terror. And then, across all Krell communications, a single voice spoke. Calm. Cold. Inhuman. You were warned. Then the slaughter truly began. The Krell Imperium had never known fear. They had conquered world after world, species after species, carving their name into the stars with blood and fire. They had always been the hunters. But now, they were the hunted. The eternal dominion was gone, along with nearly the entire armada. Only a handful of ships had managed to escape the massacre at the human colony world. They were the best the Krell had, the elite, the undefeated. And yet they fled like prey, running from something they could not see, could not fight, could not understand. Commander Gorvak was among the survivors. He sat in the war room of the Crimson Fang, his claws digging into the metal table. The others in the room, admirals, captains, warriors, were silent. Their eyes were filled with something unfamiliar. Doubt, disbelief, fear. No one had seen the enemy. No energy signatures, no ships, no weapons. One moment, their fleet had been intact. The next, ships vanished. Crew members turned on each other. Systems shut down as if controlled by an unseen force. It was a human trick, one of the admirals growled, breaking the silence. Some advanced cloaking technology, a new form of warfare. Gorvak shook his head. Technology does not erase entire warships without leaving wreckage. It does not make warriors lose their minds. The others looked away, unable to argue. A distress beacon had been activated before the fleet fell. The Imperium had received it, and reinforcements were already on their way. A second wave of ships, larger, deadlier, would arrive soon. But deep down, Gorvak was not certain that more ships would change anything. The humans had never responded, never sent threats, never revealed themselves. They had simply waited. And when the Krell came, they took them. In the darkness of space, something stirred. The escaping Krell ships had left a trail, a path leading back to the Imperium. And they were following it. Silent, invisible, patient. The humans had never been on the defensive. They had simply been choosing their moment. And now, it had come. You said, the Krell Imperium was no more. Across the galaxy, their world stood silent. Not destroyed, not conquered, erased. Entire planets, once bustling with life, had become voids of nothingness, as if they had never existed. No ruins, no remnants, just absence. The other empires watched in horror. The Centauri Republic, the Dominion of Vorth, the mighty Zarlok hegemony, each had once seen the Krell as unbreakable, a force feared by all. Now, their entire species had simply vanished, and no one understood how. No fleets had arrived. No battles had taken place. Only one thing remained. A message broadcast across every galactic channel, in every known language, on every world. It was a simple recording. A single human woman standing in a black void. She did not threaten. She did not gloat. She simply stared, her expression blank, her eyes devoid of emotion. And then she spoke. We tried to warn them. A ripple of unease spread through the galactic empires. For the first time, the war-hardened rulers of the stars felt true fear. Because they realized something terrifying. The Krell had been warned, and they had ignored it, just as they had. And now, they were left with a single unspoken question. Were the humans finished? Or had this only been a warning? They never reported back. At first, the loss was dismissed as a minor malfunction. The Krell had expected some resistance, but nothing significant. So they sent more, 100 this time. Every single one disappeared. No distress signals, no destruction detected. Just silence. A chill crept through the bridge. Even among warriors, an unease settled. Zaltor felt it but refused to acknowledge it. Deploy recon ships. I want visuals. Now. The scout vessels moved in, slipping past the outer rim of human-controlled space. Their crews were handpicked, the best the Imperium had to offer. Their ships were fast, agile, designed for stealth. They should have been untouchable. One by one, they vanished. No alarms, no warnings, no debris. Just nothing. By the time the last ship went dark, the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was silent. They were being watched. Zaltor clenched his fists. Enough games. We move in. Full force. The Krell Armada surged forward, warships cutting through the void with lethal precision. They arrived at the first human colony world, a small, seemingly insignificant planet. The fleet surrounded it, preparing for an easy conquest. There were no defenses, no planetary shields, no orbital stations. It was almost insulting. Broadcast our demands, Zaltor ordered. A transmission was sent, a simple message. Surrender or be destroyed. There was no reply. Gorvak frowned. Strange. No evacuations, no panic. The humans aren't even acknowledging us. Zaltor sneered. Then we force a response. The first bombardment began. Krell warships opened fire, unleashing a storm of plasma upon the surface. Cities burned. Structures crumbled. Within minutes, vast portions of the colony were reduced to ruins. Still, no response. No distress calls. No fleeing ships. Just silence. Then the lights flickered. A low hum vibrated through the ship, a sound that hadn't been there before. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it sent a shiver down the spines of the crew. Admiral, one of the officers called out. We're detecting something, but there's nothing on the scanners. Explain, Zaltor snapped. The officer's hands trembled over the controls. I don't know. It's like a shadow in the system. It's there, but it isn't. A cold dread settled over the bridge. Then the first ship vanished. Not exploded, not attacked, just gone. The fleet's formation collapsed into chaos. Ships scrambled to reposition. Officers shouted conflicting orders. Something was moving among them. unseen. Then the transmission came. It was not a message, not a declaration of war, just a sound. A deep, hollow noise that clawed its way into their minds. It was not of this world. It was something older, something patient. You should have listened. Screams erupted across the comms. Reports flooded in. Systems shutting down, weapons refusing to fire, crews turning on one another. The ships were no longer theirs to control. Zaltur's own vessel trembled beneath him. The lights flickered again, then died. The emergency systems engaged, bathing the bridge in blood-red illumination. The sound grew louder, filling the void of space itself. One by one, the warships ceased transmission. Zaltur's last sight before darkness swallowed him was the planet below. Not destroyed, not damaged, untouched. The humans had never been defending it. They had been waiting. The silence that followed was not the silence of a battlefield after the last shot was fired. It was deeper, absolute. There was no smoke, no ruins, no debris floating in the void where the capital of Krell Prime had once stood. There was nothing. High Warlord Kratak had nowhere to stand. He existed in a space that should not exist. There was no ground beneath him, yet he did not fall. There was no air, yet he still breathed. Everything was wrong. He turned, searching for his warlords, his warriors, anyone. But he was alone. And then they appeared. The humans. They did not step forward. They did not materialize. They were simply there, watching him with cold, unreadable expressions. One figure stood at the center, a human woman. The same woman who had spoken to them, who had appeared on the holoscreens before the capital vanished. Kratak's claws twitched. His mind screamed at him to fight, to do something. But what was there to fight? What could he do against an enemy that did not use ships, did not use weapons, did not follow the rules of war? What are you? His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. The human woman tilted her head, as if considering the question. We were trying to warn you. The words were soft, not mocking, not cruel, just stating a fact. Kratak's breath caught in his throat. The survivor. The lone alien who had come to warn them about humanity. The one they had mocked, dismissed, executed. You were trying to. His voice failed him. Warn you, the human repeated. The realization struck him like a blade to the chest. This was never a war. This was never a battle for territory, for resources, for conquest. The humans had tried to tell them. And now, it was too late. The human woman raised her hand. Kratak felt his body pull away from itself. He didn't fall. He didn't disintegrate. He simply ceased to be. And as the last remnant of the Krell Imperium faded, one final whisper echoed across the void. We tried to warn you. Panic spread like wildfire across Krell Prime. The warlords, the generals, the admirals, those who had ruled through strength and fear, now stood frozen in disbelief. Their mighty defense fleet, the greatest armada the Krell Imperium had ever assembled, was being erased before their very eyes. The Crimson Fang shuddered violently as power flickered in and out. Commander Gorvak gripped the console, his claws digging into the metal. Around him, officers barked desperate orders, but it was useless. There was no enemy to fight. Shields at maximum. Fire everything. Gorvak roared. The ship's weapons discharged in all directions, sending energy blasts and torpedoes screaming into the void. But there was nothing, nothing to hit, nothing to see. Only the quiet hum of the ship, the flashing warnings of failing systems, and the sight of warships vanishing without a trace. And then it happened. The lights dimmed. The ship groaned. And from the shadows, they stepped forward. Humans. Not in bulky armor, not in mechanized suits, just humans, walking through the corridors of the Crimson Fang, untouched by weapons fire, moving with a calmness that sent pure dread through Gorvak's body. His warriors opened fire, plasma rounds, disruptors, railgun shots. Nothing worked. The humans didn't dodge. They didn't flinch. The shot simply passed through them. One of the humans, a tall figure with dead, hollow eyes, looked directly at Gorvak. And then, the ship screamed. Not the crew, not the warriors, the ship itself. Metal groaned, bulkheads cracked, alarms shrieked in agony. The Crimson Fang was being devoured by something unseen, something unstoppable. Gorvak fell to his knees, his body failing him. His vision blurred as the walls around him faded, piece by piece, as if they had never existed. His warriors were already gone. The bridge was gone. And then, so was he. On the surface of Krell Prime, High Warlord Kratak watched in frozen horror as his entire fleet disappeared. No wreckage, no debris, no survivors. Just emptiness. This is not war, one of his advisors whispered, voice shaking. This is something else. Kratak forced himself to stand tall, to suppress the cold dread clawing at his chest. We still have the planetary defenses. The shields will hold. They cannot. A sudden silence fell over the war room. The lights flickered. The holoscreens, which had once displayed tactical data, now showed something else. A single human face. Female. Expressionless. Empty-eyed. And when she spoke, her voice echoed across every speaker, every communication channel, every mind in the room. We are already here. And then, the capital city of Krell Prime began to disappear. You said crew members would vanish from their stations, only for their mutilated bodies to be found floating outside airlocks. Soldiers would report hearing voices in the comms, their own voices, mocking them. The more they fought, the less control they had over their own ships. We thought we were the hunters. Cordell choked out, his eyes wide with haunted memories. But we were the prey. By the time the Dominion fleet realized what was happening, it was too late. Humanity had never been fighting to win a battle. They had been fighting to make sure there would be no war left to fight. The last stand had been on the moon of a desolate gas giant. What was left of the Zorvath forces had gathered there, desperate to hold the final position. They had deployed shields, planetary defenses, entire battalions of elite warriors. And then the humans came. Not in a massive fleet, not with overwhelming force, but with a single ship. It was small, Cordell whispered. Smaller than anything we had. We laughed at first. And then. The ship never fired a single shot. It never needed to. It simply drifted toward them, a ghost in the void. The Zorvath commander screamed orders to fire, to obliterate it before it could come closer. But the ship was already inside their systems. Their weapons refused to lock on. Their shields failed. Their engines died. And then the transmissions began. Not words, not threats, just silence, the kind that seeped into your bones, that made your heart pound in terror. And one by one, the Zorvath ships shut down. Their crews lost control. Their own machines turned against them. I don't know what happened after that, Cordell admitted, his voice breaking. I was on the last escape pod, watching from the darkness. That thing never fired a shot, but when the sun rose over that moon, there was nothing left. No wreckage, no bodies, only silence. He shuddered, his claws digging into the floor as he looked up at the council, desperation in his gaze. They are not conquerors, he whispered. They are not warlords. They are something else, something older, something patient. They let us come. They let us think we were winning. And then, when we were deep enough, when there was no way out, they ended us. The chamber had gone silent. The counselors who had once laughed now sat frozen, their expressions unreadable. Then the high speaker scoffed, shaking his head. You expect us to believe that a backwater species did this, that they have power beyond anything in the known galaxy. He leaned forward, his golden eyes narrowing. You are either a liar or a fool. Cordell's heart sank. They weren't listening. They wouldn't believe him, just like the Dominion hadn't believed. As he was dragged away by the guards, his final words echoed through the chamber. "You should have listened." The Galactic Council chamber remained tense long after Cordell had been dragged away. His final words lingered in the air like an unshakable omen. Some of the counselors dismissed his warning as the ramblings of a broken mind. Others, however, found themselves haunted by the sheer terror in his voice. But no one acted. They should have. Far from the grand halls of politics, in the cold expanse of deep space, something moved. Unseen, unheard, unstoppable. The Dominion had been the first to test humanity. They would not be the last. High Admiral Xaltor of the Krell Imperium stood aboard his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, staring at the tactical display before him. His fleet, a force of over 300 warships, drifted in perfect formation along the outer rim of human-controlled space. Intelligence reports had confirmed the Zorvith Dominion's catastrophic failure. The humans had wiped them from existence, and yet no wreckage had ever been recovered. The Krell did not fear war. They thrived in it. Their species had been bred for battle, their empire forged in the blood of 1,000 conquered worlds. The destruction of the Zorvith was not a warning. It was an opportunity. "Their silence is a bluff," Xaltor said, his voice deep and resolute. "No species can hide forever. If they are as dangerous as the Zorvith claimed, they would have already retaliated." His second-in-command, a heavily armored brute named Gorvak, nodded. "Agreed, Admiral. They should have struck by now. Instead, they sit in the shadows, hoping we fear them." Fear. The very word disgusted him. The Krell feared nothing. Xaltor turned to his officers. "Initiate the incursion. I want probes deployed across all human systems. If they exist in the dark, we will pull them into the light." Within moments, dozens of automated probes launched from the fleet, streaking toward human space. Each was equipped with advanced scanning technology, their sole purpose to map out the enemy's defenses.